His red MAGA hat became the catalyst for a scandal that began with a rude expulsion from the club and escalated into a shock for everyone present. The security guard was confident he was in the right, until he discovered he had just kicked out one of the most influential people in the room. But instead of seeking revenge, the man did something that forever changed the atmosphere of the club. This is a story about how calmness has the power to overturn even the strongest prejudices. The elite Manhattan Club radiated luxury. Golden chandeliers cast a soft glow on the perfectly polished marble floors, bartenders skillfully crafted cocktails, and waiters, dressed in crisp white shirts and black vests, glided noiselessly between the tables. Everything here spoke of status and exclusivity. The door to the club swung open, letting in the crisp morning air and a middle-aged man. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and exuded quiet confidence. He wore a simple white shirt, dark jeans, and a bright red MAGA hat that seemed to shine in this world of neutral tones. This was Tom Harris, one of the club's largest investors, and a man who believed that convictions were not something to be ashamed of. For a moment, everything froze, but then people returned to their conversations. Almost everyone. Near the entrance stood a young security guard, Michael, who, judging by his proud posture and slightly narrowed eyes, clearly saw himself as the authority here. His jaw visibly tightened when his gaze landed on Tom's hat. Michael stepped forward, blocking Tom's path. "Excuse me, sir," he said, his voice carrying the tone of someone fulfilling an important mission. "But I must remind you of our dress code. Your, choice of accessory does not align with the club's policy." Tom stopped and looked at him with a slight smile. "Really? Does the club's policy refer to hats or to beliefs?" His tone was so calm that it only made Michael more irritated. "Our guests value comfort and respect. That accessory creates the wrong kind of atmosphere," Michael said, crossing his arms and clearly hoping the issue would resolve quickly. From nearby tables, whispers and muffled laughter began to ripple through the air. A few people pulled out their phones, subtly aiming their cameras in their direction. "Well," Tom replied with the same calm demeanor. "Then please, explain how exactly my hat disrupts someone's sense of comfort. I'm all ears." Michael squinted, his face growing more tense. "If you refuse to remove it, I'll have to ask you to leave. Those are the rules," he said, raising his voice slightly, as if wanting to ensure everyone around could hear. The crowd began to pay attention. Someone whispered, "I've never seen anything like this here before." Michael clearly enjoyed the spotlight. Tom, however, remained motionless. "Do you have management to confirm this?" Tom asked calmly. Michael rolled his eyes. "Look, I don't want to make a scene, but if you don't leave voluntarily, I'll call security." Tom tilted his head slightly to the side, smiling. "Please, go ahead. I'm curious to see how your justice will play out." The tension in the room was palpable, and the audience was thoroughly enjoying the unfolding drama. Michael, feeling like the arbiter of justice, folded his arms across his chest, as if preparing to personally escort Tom out. "Get out," he said, his tone shifting to something harsher. "This club is for respectable people, not for supporters of, well, you know." Tom's expression remained calm. He adjusted his hat, as though completely unaware of the growing tension, which only seemed to irritate Michael more. "Respectable people?" Tom repeated, with a faint smile. "Interesting. What exactly does that mean?" Whispers grew louder. A man in a sharp suit murmured, "A provocateur, clearly." A woman in an elegant evening gown nearby scoffed audibly. "Exactly. There's no place for people like that here." Michael, encouraged by the crowd's support, stepped closer to Tom, his voice louder and sharper. "Take off that hat or leave the club immediately. Otherwise, I'll call the police." At that moment, it seemed as though the entire room held its breath, waiting for the next move. Some guests had their phones out, recording the scene, turning it into an impromptu show. People exchanged glances. Some smiled, anticipating drama, while others looked away, pretending nothing was happening. Tom raised an eyebrow, tilting his head slightly. Are you sure you want to take it this far? His voice was still remarkably even. Michael ignored the question. He stepped toward Tom decisively, his whole demeanor signaling that he was ready to physically remove him from the premises. The crowd buzzed with murmurs. "Finally, someone's doing something," the same woman in the gown said. "He'll learn not to provoke people," someone else chimed in from the back. Michael was now close enough to act. His hand twitched, as if he were about to grab Tom's shoulder. At that moment, Tom stepped back and calmly raised a hand, stopping the guard in his tracks. There was a mix of surprise and subtle sarcasm in Tom's eyes. "Seriously?" Tom said, his voice now slightly louder so the whole room could hear. "You're willing to go this far over a hat?" Laughter rippled through the room, and Michael froze. His face turned red. Whether from anger or embarrassment, it was hard to tell. Without waiting for a response, Tom added, "Fine, call the police. I'm sure they'd love to hear how your respect policy works." As Michael reached out to grab Tom's arm, the doors to the room burst open with a loud bang. Every head turned toward the entrance, where the club's administrator, a tall man in a sharp suit, stood, panting heavily. His usually immaculate hairstyle was now slightly disheveled. His face was pale, and his gaze darted anxiously between Michael and Tom. "Stop!" he shouted, barely catching his breath. "Stop this immediately!" Michael froze, staring at the administrator in confusion. "What?" he asked, frowning. "This man is violating—" "That's Mr. Harris," the administrator interrupted, his voice trembling. "Are you out of your mind?" Michael slowly lowered his hand, but his expression remained baffled. "Sorry, who?" he muttered. The administrator stepped forward, nearly shielding Tom as though protecting him from some unseen threat. "He's the club's primary investor," the administrator whispered, though his voice carried loudly enough for the entire room to hear. For a moment, there was complete silence, followed by a wave of hushed murmurs. Someone dropped a champagne glass, and the woman in the elegant gown, who had previously loudly condemned Tom, quickly averted her gaze, pretending to be engrossed in her phone. "Is that true?" Tom finally asked, turning to the administrator. His voice was calm, almost emotionless, which only heightened the tension. The administrator, slumping under the weight of the situation, slowly nodded, avoiding Tom's gaze. "I deeply apologize, sir," he whispered, as though afraid to speak too loudly. Tom removed his hat and ran a hand through his hair. His expression remained neutral, but a faint glimmer of sarcasm danced in his eyes. "Interesting welcome," he said. The crowd of guests who had so recently backed Michael now exchanged glances of awkwardness and shame. Some hastily put their phones away, while others continued recording, eager to capture the unfolding conclusion. Michael, red with embarrassment, nervously rubbed his palms against his pants. "Mr. Harris, I didn't know," he mumbled, trying to justify himself. Tom, maintaining his calm demeanor, tilted his head slightly, studying the guard carefully. "Perhaps it's worth learning more about people before judging them by appearances," he said, his voice quiet but cutting through the silence like thunder. The administrator, eager to smooth things over, quickly stepped forward. "My sincerest apologies, Mr. Harris. This is an awful mistake. Please allow me to personally make it up to you. I'll arrange the best table and a glass of our exclusive champagne right away." Tom raised his hand, halting the torrent of apologies. "Thank you, but that won't be necessary," he said with a faint smile. "I didn't come here for that." He turned back to Michael, who remained rooted to the spot, unsure what to do with his hands. Any trace of the guard's former confidence was gone. "I don't want him to be fired," Tom said, glancing at the administrator. "But perhaps a little training in tolerance and customer relations wouldn't hurt." At these words, the room erupted into applause. Someone shouted, "Well said!" And even those who had moments ago cast judgmental looks at Tom now joined in clapping. Michael, red as a beet, hung his head and mumbled, "Thank you, Mr. Harris." Tom took a few steps toward the exit, but suddenly stopped and turned around. His gaze landed on a phone camera pointed directly at him. "Go ahead and keep filming," he said with a faint smirk. "Let more people see how sometimes staying calm is the best way to achieve justice." With that, he left the room, leaving behind a buzz of chatter among the guests. Many were discussing the incident, marveling at Tom's composure. Michael, meanwhile, stood in the middle of the room, feeling small and overwhelmed under the weight of dozens of watchful eyes. A few hours later, a video taken by one of the guests went viral on social media. The comments under the clip were filled with both sarcasm and admiration. "The guard tried to play tough but ran into a wall of calm. Take notes on how to stay cool under pressure." Tom Harris is the embodiment of what it means to rise above the situation. The culmination came from the club itself. That very evening, they launched a new advertising campaign with the slogan, "We welcome everyone with respect, even those who surprise us." The story gained traction, and the club received a wave of free publicity that, judging by the response, brought in new guests. As for Michael, he kept his job, but his approach to work had clearly changed, just like the perspective of many who witnessed that day.